Welcome, a warm welcome to each one of you. No matter where you are, here in person or online, it is a treat to be together, to be practicing together. Hi Jet, welcome. And hay interpretación en español. Si desean elegir eso, no veo a nadie que lo querrá en este momento, pero lo estamos grabando de todos modos. Así que para las personas que están observando esto en línea, en YouTube, pueden escribirnos y pedir traducción. All right, beautiful. So, welcome to Sunday Sounds of Dhamma, everyone. And just a couple of announcements. So, we will be having a brunch here at the vihara next Sunday for any folks who are here close by in person. We ask that you RSVP for that. Just write us at one of the various and sundry emails. It's on the calendar on the website. So that we know what food you're going to bring for the potluck. And what else? Registration's still open for the residential retreat that's happening in June, and the class on embodying the Dharma, a longer class with quite a few different perspectives on that particular question. And if you want to sign up for those two things, you need to sign up for them separately, even though they do kind of go together. The June retreat could be a launch for you of the class. And what else? Oh, this evening, I am very much looking forward to this evening's art workshop. It's going to be a very special one. It is a virtual tour of Buddhist art at the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Art. And we won't be actually going there, but I did go yesterday and get quite a bit of footage, so it's going to be a little bit more in-depth than some of the other art tours that we've done. And if that's of interest to you, it's 6 to 8:30 p.m. tonight, Eastern Time. All right. So that's about it for announcements, I think. And I think for this morning's practice, we just want to try to settle into our breath. And in particular, really building up our capacity to stay with the breath. So if you haven't already muted your mic, please do so. Thank you. And just know that the mind moving away from the object that you want to attend to, in this case the breath, is okay. Once you notice that, then you're back. Then you can just gently and actually with some joy, like, hey, I'm back. Just go back to attending to the breath. Okay. All right. So just a little instruction around that. Let's go ahead and settle into our posture. Meditation posture. I like to begin with a little bit of movement. And then really just allowing the body to find its own alignment so that the bones of the spine can line up and the weight of the body can be carried by the bones. So the muscles perhaps can soften and widen. Softening the eyes and softening the mouth. Perhaps by now the sensations of the breath are starting to come to the foreground. You could just rest the attention on those sensations wherever you find them in the body. Maybe at the tip of the nose, in the throat, in the chest, or all the way down in the lower abdomen. Just receiving the sensations of the breath, breathing the body. Being curious about the breath of this moment. Aware of the inhalation and aware of the exhalation. Perhaps noticing any pauses between the breaths. Just aware of those natural moments of stillness. All right, that brings us to the end of this meditation part of our program. And if you have any questions or reflections on that, we can take them at the end after the Dharma talk. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and bring up the chant. It occurred to me yesterday that there's no need to actually hand out the sheets here in the room because everybody can see it on the screen too. And one, there we go. Everybody see that? Right. So this is the homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. The awakened one, or you could say the nature of awakening itself. The Dhamma is the teachings that are the path to awakening. And the Sangha is both the ordained community and the lay community, all folks who are on this path in one way or another. So we can chant it all together. This is the Pali language, so if that's feels unusual, then feel free to just listen and receive. Can you say okay there, Diva? Can you say okay over there? Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. The beauty of the Noble Path of Buddhism is that it applies to your whole life. And if you want, if you like, you can just practice one part or limit the way that you have it in your life. And that's okay. That's also beneficial. But the practice really is designed to embrace all parts of you, all parts of a complex human life. And that's a beautiful thing. There aren't many aspects of our lives about which we can say that it will embrace all of you, will meet you where you are. In fact, I would say that that's often a turning point for folks when they find that they are able, that they are willing, and they have the supports to engage with the practice as part of their whole life. Partly because there's a kind of creativity that can come out of that. There's a kind of creativity in the way that you think about what it means to be practicing. What does it mean to be awakening to the truths of your life? But also because there is a sense of compassion, of self-compassion that can arise when we turn again and again to the path as a response to what's happening. And we include the path as part of what's happening. And so the path that has been described, the Noble Path, has been described in many, many different ways. That's why we have so many books. There are thousands and thousands, maybe about 10,000 discourses from what's called the early tradition. And then there are all sorts of other teachings around the monastic order from the early tradition. And then there are centuries and centuries of development of thought and of ways of practicing. And they have their own books and so on. It's a beautiful thing. Because, as my master used to say, Zen Master Sekihara Roshi, who ordained me 18 years ago yesterday, he used to say, there are as many dharmas as there are minds. And I used to think, oh yeah, right, each person has their own mind, and there's a teaching for each person. But actually, over the years, I've come to realize that each moment is a mind, is a unique form of a mind for each one of us. And there's a unique teaching for each moment. It's quite profound. But one way that I want to talk today about the path and how it can be really particularly relevant to everyday life is the path as a set of intentions and activities and discoveries that help us to eliminate greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, hatred, and delusion. So those are the three they're called the roots, the unwholesome roots in the early tradition, or in the Zen tradition, in one of the later traditions that came out of Japan. They're called the poisons, the three poisons. And you could think of them as, that's kind of a dramatic way to talk about them, the poisons, you know. You could think about them as really a way of talking about what are some of the problems in a human life, what are some of the reasons why we suffer, why we encounter difficulty, why we encounter confusion. So in a way, you could, I sometimes, when I read the discourses, especially the older ones, I think, oh, you know, there's this problem-solving approach. So we think of ourselves as modern people, you know, who have perfected the art of problem-solving, but not so much, you know. Not so much. It's actually, there's actually a lot of wisdom about that. A lot of very practical wisdom that comes from long ago. So we could take this sort of problem-solving approach and have a look at it. Not because we're going to, you know, fix ourselves, but rather because there are ways that we can work with our tendencies, we can work with the mechanisms, if you will, that are happening in our minds and bodies. And by virtue of working with them, find ways to, as I said, suffer less, have less difficulty, find our way to clarity. So the first of these, so greed. Greed is, I think, a very pervasive problem in the world. We can see that any old time. Just open up your phone and we can see it in ourselves sometimes. That's also important to notice. And the practice that the path has presented for us and by many teachers is generosity. Practice of generosity, of giving, said to be one of the fundamental qualities that can help us along the path. And giving is something that anyone can do. It, you know, I wrote a book actually about giving and different forms of giving that I have been blessed to experience, and one of the things that was abundantly clear to me was the fact that anybody can give. It is a matter of knowing what you can and what you're willing to share. So even if you only have a little, you can start small. There was a story in the newspaper. Unfortunately, I didn't keep it and I didn't bother to go try to hunt it down today, but there's a story in the newspaper a while back about some men who were incarcerated, and they do certain kinds of work when they're incarcerated, and so they were making 25 cents an hour. And they were gathering up their 25 cents an hour and donating it to pay for school lunches for kids who didn't have money to pay for their school lunches. I was really moved by that. I thought, wow, here are these people in this very difficult situation, talking about this very small amount of money, and what was important to them was to use it in a good way, to use it to help somebody. For me, one way that I do this is I keep granola bars in my car, so that when there are people standing at the street corner who are asking for money, I can't give them money because I also live by donations, but I will give, if they're hungry, I will give them a granola bar. Somebody once taught me, if you're going to do that, you have to give soft ones, because many of them have lost their teeth. They don't have dental care. You have to give them soft ones. But maybe some folks have a lot. And I'll tell you a little story about somebody who had a lot and who found giving was very influential in her life. And there's a story about a woman named Ambapali. Ambapali. And Ambapali was a courtesan. She lived with the Lakavi clan in the northern part of India back around the time of the Buddha, so maybe 5th century or 6th century BC. And she's extremely gorgeous, and so to say that she is a courtesan is a polite way. That's how the translators politely say that she was a sex worker, right? And she had gained a lot of wealth through that because she was very well liked by the folks in her community. And Ambapali found out that the Buddha was staying in the forest close by. So she said, well, let me go see this person. I'm curious about what's all the talk, you know? And so she goes into the forest and she says it was so quiet that she had to sneak around to find them, the Buddha and the monastics who were in the forest. And she sees the Buddha seated there. He's in meditation and he's so radiant and he's so still and peaceful looking that she immediately bows down to him. And he sees her and he says, oh, please sit down. Right? This is the Buddha. He doesn't need her reverence. He's like, okay, sit down. Let me give you a talk. So he gives her a Dharma talk. And she is so moved by the Dharma talk that she says, please let me offer you a meal. I would like to offer you and all the monastics who are here gathered a meal tomorrow, as in gratitude for this wonderful wisdom that you've shared with me. So the Buddha accepts by silence. That's how it's said. He doesn't shoo her away. That means that he's accepted. So great. So she runs to her chariot, and she is excited to go and start preparing the meal for the next day. And it's said that there's a group of young Lakavi nobles who see her. They're in chariots and they're also on their way to see the Buddha, and they see her on the road and they're like, hey, why are you in such a hurry? And she says, well, I just have offered the Buddha a meal and the Sangha a meal, and I need to go, start getting ready. And these Lakavi youths were known for being rowdy and violent. That's how they were known. They were kind of not a formal gang, but kind of like that. They were ruffians, or you could say, slight ruffians. And in fact, it's funny because when I was on the pilgrimage a couple of weeks back, the gentleman BJ, who was one of the guides for us, he referred to them as the Lakavi bros. Bros, like for the translator here, bros like brothers, like that. Anyway, so the Lakavi bros stop Ambapali and say, hey, where are you going in a hurry? And she says, I'm going to get ready to prepare the meal that I'm offering to the Buddha tomorrow. And they say, no, we want to offer the meal to the Buddha tomorrow. So we'll offer you 100,000 coins, gold coins, so that we will offer the meal and not you. Now, this is a society in which the woman would be expected to back down, right? She would be expected to just politely let them do what they want to do. But Ambapali isn't that kind of lady, right? Ambapali speaks up for herself, and she says, no, I've offered him the meal. You could give me the entire kingdom and I wouldn't give you the chance to offer him the meal because I'm going to do it. So they go to the Buddha and they try to convince the Buddha, and the Buddha says, no, Ambapali has already offered me the meal for tomorrow. So in the long run, she offers him the meal and she becomes his student. And not only does she become his student, but she eventually becomes a nun. And not only does she become a nun, but she eventually also becomes a fully awakened being and becomes respected as one of the great disciples of the Buddha. Why? Because of her generosity. Because of her generosity. And also something about her intention, right? The strength of her intention, the strength of knowing herself as somebody who's worthy of being on the path, worthy of waking up. And we are all that way. We are all that worthy. So giving is wisdom. And then we have hatred or anger. This is a difficult one, in part because we can't just tell ourselves that it's not okay to be angry. That's not a skillful thing to do. That's not what the Dhamma would tell you to do either. When anger is here, then it needs to be addressed. It needs to be acknowledged. It needs to be attended to. But the practice that is offered is a practice of loving kindness. And by that I don't mean, oh, I'm feeling angry at this person, let me send them some metta, let me send them some loving kindness. That's one way to practice, but I think oftentimes what that does is it misses the point of acknowledgement of the feeling angry part, right? It's just wanting to turn away. It's just wanting to fix the situation. But rather, the practice of loving kindness is something which is being developed and cultivated regularly as a way of establishing that quality in the mind before the situation that might bring up some anger. So again, I would say it's possible here to start small. It may feel like a very big leap to go from hatred to loving kindness. And that's why we talk about cultivation or development on the path. Because it's possible just to begin with something very small and mundane. In fact, I would suggest that you try to take up this practice of noticing when you feel kindness, just regular old mundane kindness, care, goodwill during the day. At any point, just make a note of that. Oh, look, there's some kindness. There's some kindness that I'm feeling, or there's some kindness that someone else is demonstrating. Just notice that there is kindness in your day. In part because, for one, that feels better, right? It's important to acknowledge that it's there and that these positive qualities are part of our experience. It's not something that you have to generate from scratch. It's already there. It's already happening. If you don't have enough of it, you could take up some of those Instagram accounts that are where they show like cute little bunnies and stuff. Right? That's what I do. I love the Panda channel. Right? I'm serious. I'm really serious. So the Buddha speaks of loving kindness as being like the sun shining at high noon on a clear day. This brightness, this uplifting. Right now, as we're coming into the season where we have a bit more sunlight, it's like, ah, yes, like that. Yeah, so let kindness be like that. Let kindness be your sunshine. I know that sounds really hokey, but the truth is that even small bits of that will help you to develop this much more, you could say, this habit in the mind of turning to kindness instead of turning to anger, and being able to share kindness more and more and more broadly. It's just a matter of practice. So that's wisdom, and that's a particular, so I spoke about the wisdom of generosity. The wisdom of generosity is the wisdom of knowing our connections, just as Ambapali understood her connection with the Buddha. The wisdom of giving is also the wisdom of knowing that all things are leaving us. All things, sooner or later, in death or in life, are leaving us. So sometimes we get to choose how they leave in a good way. And then we have the wisdom of the loving kindness. What is the wisdom of loving kindness? It's the wisdom of not struggling. Don't get into a tussle with your anger. Yes, if you're about to do something harmful to yourself or to another person, then you might need to be very firm with yourself. You might need to be very, very strict, even severe, to stop yourself from doing something harmful. But in the absence of that, any other kind of anger that's coming up, I would say, don't get into a fight with your fight. That's not a good idea. It's better to begin to learn how to work with the mind, how to work with the positive qualities of the mind. And our tendency to develop habits, right? We know that we can develop habits, that we can come back again and again and again and again to something. So then why not have that something be something wholesome? And finally, there is this matter of delusion. Greed, hatred, and delusion, the third of the big problems. And so first of all, what is delusion? Delusion is when we are mistaken about the nature of our lives, when we are mistaken about how things actually work. How our minds work, how our bodies work, how the world works. That's delusion. One example that the Buddha gave was about perception. He said perception is like a mirage, right? So what's a mirage? You're driving out there in the desert and the road is hot and it looks like there's water on the road. Or maybe you're walking instead of driving. I wouldn't recommend it in the desert when it's that hot, but okay. And you get closer and closer and you see that there was never any water there. It looked like water, but there is never actually any water there. It doesn't mean that there isn't some phenomena happening. There are phenomena happening. There's the heat, there's the road, there's the air, there's the way that the light is interacting with those things. But it's not what you think it is. And that is a very good example of delusion. right? Delusion about our lives is so pervasive. And usually it comes in that form. It comes in the form of we're either adding something to what we perceive, we're adding some kind of mistaken understanding or some kind of layer of thinking we see something that's there that's not there. That's often how the sense of self works. Or we're just not perceiving something. We are so in a struggle or so rushed or so committed to another idea that we won't perceive actually what's happening, what's actually occurring. So these are the two primary ways that are common ways of being mistaken or being deluded. And both of them lead to a sense of clinging. That's the fundamental problem with the delusion. If we were just deluded and it was all gay, it would be fine. We would be gay, everything would be fine. But no, it's not like that, actually. Delusion leads to clinging rather than to joy or clarity. And it leads to this kind of suffering that comes out of clinging, right? And so this is where I brought my one and only prop. I only have one prop, therefore it must be my favorite prop. So I use this one. I use this one for, now I have like 2 or 3 uses for it. It's getting to be even more fun, the light ball. So this is a light ball, and I use this sometimes to talk about how we experience the world, but I'm going to use it slightly differently today, and I'm going to use the light ball today to talk about clinging, okay? So here's the ball. So this is some belief that you have, or this is something that happened, or this is some person, or this is some job title, or this is some money, the ball, right? And here it is. You're clinging to it. You're holding on to it nice and tight. But what did I say earlier, right? All things are leaving you, right? So that's a painful process. If you're holding on tighter and tighter and it's still leaving, that's a painful process, right? So then maybe you get smart and you do some practice and you start to see a little bit about how things work. And then you do this and you're like, see, I'm not clinging anymore. But I'm like, really? Now think about that for a moment. You might be doing a more subtle form of clinging, but you still haven't actually really embraced the letting go, right? So a person who has stopped clinging, either to one thing, because we do this usually a little at a time, or completely, is more like this, right? It's like this. The thing comes and the thing goes, and there's absolutely no resistance to that. There's no hanging on. There's no stopping it. There's no any of that. It's just phenomena happening. So there's no possibility of that pain that comes from the leaving. So for that, what I want to say, and then I'll stop talking, is I want to say that one practice that can be quite helpful is mindfulness of cessation. Watch the endings of things. Just notice. Just notice. You don't have to like it or dislike it or put any kind of a label on it or help it along or stop it. Whatever's happening, just notice the endings of things, because you're starting to train the mind to be willing to see that that is the truth of your life. That things are ending. And the path of practice is to find your peace with that. So I have a quote here because what I want to say is that the wisdom of practicing with delusion is the wisdom of non-clinging, of learning how to let go of that resistance to the natural way that things are. And it's a quote by this young woman, Eddie Hillesum. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Eddie Hillesum. I don't know very much about her, honestly, but I was at the I was at the World Parliament of Religions, or rather, the Parliament of World Religions. They changed the name of it a while back. And there were these cards with some of her writings. She's a young woman, a Dutch woman, Dutch Jewish woman, who was writing her letters and her diaries about her personal spiritual awakenings, but also something about World War II and what was happening to Jews. She actually was killed at Auschwitz. She was one of the folks who was killed in 1943 at the age of 29 in the camps there in Auschwitz, Germany. But this is something that she wrote, and I thought this is such a beautiful, beautiful expression of this non-clinging. She said, "This grasping attitude suddenly fell away from me." Now, I don't know at what point she's saying that this happened to her in her life, but this grasping attitude suddenly fell away from me. 1,000 tyrannical chains were broken, and I breathed freely again and felt strong and looked about with shining eyes. And now that I don't want to own anything anymore and am free, now I suddenly own everything. Now my inner riches are immeasurable. The grasping attitude fell away, and she looked about with shining eyes and felt strong and felt like everything belonged to her, was part of her. So may you also find your strength and your shining eyes. All right, folks. So that means that it's time for questions, for reflections. Anything that you want to share? Anything about the meditation? Yeah.
Yeah, Ayaji, talking about greed and anger, you see it, if not translated, interpreted a lot of times as wanting, not wanting, and attraction aversion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think looking at it that way sort of diminishes the force of the idea of greed and anger, or misses the point a little?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering.
Yeah, it's a good question. I agree that that is often how it's presented, and I'm not sure that wanting or not wanting is the problem.
Yeah.
Right? It's a little bit more than that. It's a little bit more than that. It is the way in which, in fact, if we think about how the dependent origination happens, is the way in which we get pushed around by the wanting and the not wanting, right? If you know that you're wanting and you have a choice about it and you're clear about it, then it may or may not be unskillful, right? But when it becomes something that is, you could say, unobserved, and that is driving us toward, resistance to reality rather than acceptance of what is, then that's a problem. And I just want to say one other word about this thing, resistance. So resistance can be a good thing, especially right now, I will say. Resistance could be a very good thing. But again, it needs to be based in an idea of acceptance of what's happening, understanding the context of what's happening, and then responding from a place, a wholesome place, not a place of control, because we know that we cannot control. We can be a presence, a force, a factor, a condition for good. And that's an important thing to do. That's actually an important choice to make, and part of the path also. Yes, Brad.
So just without getting into specific politics, just in terms of perception, it's just literally mind-blowing, how we can be seeing completely different realities, and you step back and go, well, how can those people believe that? And as soon as you say that, you've got to go, well, wait a minute, how can I believe this, and be willing to investigate that? And, the other thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if this is a new time in history. I guess every time in history is a new time in one sense, but when the three poisons are almost blatantly held up as virtues in a lot of quarters, it's problematic.
Yeah.
There's no way to soft pedal that and say, oh well, it's just differences of opinions and things. Well, it's deeper than that. When greed is praised as a virtue, when holding others in contempt is seen as something positive, and when self-view is kind of the ultimate, do everything for yourself because that's what's really important, doesn't bode well for. So anyway.
Yes. Thank you, Brad. Yes. Thank you for the reflection. Yeah, and it makes me think that it's, for me, the precepts is really my guide, right? When I think about ethics and morality, in fact, we have a copy of of course, I am bound by the Bodhisattva precepts, as are more than lifetime precepts that I've taken many, many times in my life, but also, the ethics policy of the Soto Zen Buddhist Association is here on the altar for anybody who has a question about what kind of ethics we practice here. So for me, really, the ethics is the particular way that, the lens that I use when I think about what's happening in the world and how to respond to that. Thank you, Brad. I have one question in the chat, and even though it's 10:29, we're going to answer the question. ¿Puedes profundizar en resistencia sin estrés? Okay, yes. So the question is, can I say something more about resistance without stress? So for me, oftentimes it is this question of control. The difference between understanding oneself as a condition in the world, and we're trying to work with the wholesome conditions and establish wholesome conditions in the world, and trying to force the world to be as I envision it, that's a big difference. That's the difference between stress and actually doing something in response to what I believe needs to change, what I believe is actually not helpful. Okay, so we have arrived at our time. And Dana, maybe you want to make the brief announcement here, and then I'll close with the dedication of merit.
Great. Giving to Dassanaya Buddhist Community supports our guiding teacher, the physical location at the vihara, and allows us to continue to offer Buddhist teachings in support of the awakening of all beings. There are several ways to donate on the website. The spring fundraiser is live. It's easy to find in the navigation. There's opportunities to volunteer, and you're invited to sign up for the newsletter on the homepage that always brings calendar tidbits to you and a letter from Dhammadīpā. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dana. And yes, thanks to everyone for your presence and your contributions in so many different ways. You are what makes this a community, really. So I want to dedicate the merits, the beneficial karmic momentum that we have set up today by our practice to clarity. Clarity and wisdom for all beings, beings far away and beings near, beings who are dear and beings who are difficult, beings in all the various realms of existence, that all beings might find their freedom from mental and physical suffering, that all beings might be liberated. Excuse me. By the power of the Buddhas. The Dhamma and the Sangha. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
It's too all.
Thank you.